Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for agreeing to participate on this embodiment, inclusion, and accessibility panel. It was our hope with an intention with this event to give a space for courageous and compassionate conversations and to really explore through your respective work embodied perspectives of practice and what practice can do in the world. I'll just for everyone, share some brief introductions. In going through, because I was aware of some of you and discovering with delight, all of your work, and was really struck by both the deep roots of your own practice and then how you've grown that root out to really reach out to need in the world. And so if you'll sort of have patience just so I can share just a tiniest sliver of your work and then have you speak to it directly yourself. And so I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Valerie Mason-Johns. She's an author of 9 books now, a public speaker and a master trainer in the field of conflict transformation, leadership, and mindfulness. And just really briefly, I want to mention 2 of her books. She has a multi-award winning book, 8-Step Recovery, Using the Buddha's Teaching to Overcome Addiction. It's an approach that offers mindfulness teaching, outlining a course of recovery from addiction, what she calls stinking thinking, negative mental states, and compulsive and obsessive behaviors. Her 8-Step Recovery program is also available online, and you can find recovery meetings taking place around the world: UK, US, Canada, Mexico, India, and Finland. And her most recent book, just published this year, I'm Still Your Negro, an homage to James Baldwin. In this book, Valerie gifts us with truth-telling through her spoken word poetry, and narratives relating to true stories of entrapment, sexual assault, addictive behaviors, and rave culture, told and contrasted through the strengthening and forthright voice of Yata, a supreme being. And so I'll post links at the beginning and at the end, but please check out more of her story at her website, ValerieMason-John.com. So thank you and welcome. And by her request, Valerie's going to be speaking last when we do our questioning in the panel, as was conveyed to me. So thank you, Valerie, for being here, and welcome. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Wendy Harris. She's an addiction and trauma recovery specialist, international yoga trainer, certified teacher of Kundalini yoga and meditation, and holds a doctorate in clinical psychology. Her research was entitled Beyond Addiction, Mindfulness Meditation and Kundalini Yoga for Recovery from Opioid Dependence. And so she works internationally as a consultant and a recovery coach with clients online and in her practice in West Los Angeles. Although I've just heard, Wendy, that you've had to relocate in this time. Yeah. She's director of the Addiction and Recovery Specialization at Antioch University, Los Angeles, in a master's program in clinical psychology, a program she created to teach graduate students training to be therapists. And she's also an instructor and professional trainer with the Beyond Addiction program. It's an international program providing a comprehensive approach to release the self-defeating habits while nourishing the body, mind, and spirit. So again, you can find more details about Wendy's work at her website, and also post the Beyond Addiction website as well. So again, thank you very much and welcome. Yeah, a little bit lengthy introductions because you've all had big impact. You've all been doing lots of work. So I really kind of want to take the moment to really acknowledge that. So next, pleased to welcome Ray. Ray is a queer somatic scholar and activist whose teaching and research focus on the embodied experience of oppression. She holds a PhD in education from the University of Toronto and has conducted research on the effects of dance movement therapy on post-traumatic stress, on the professional knowledge of somatic educator, arts-based somatic literacy, and the embodied experience of oppression. And so they currently lead the somatic study specialization in the depth psychology doctoral program at Pacifica Graduate Institute. And so Ray has worked to support and advocate for people experiencing oppression, marginalization, and discrimination. And they have served communities including queer and trans folks, psychiatric survivors, children with autism, homeless youth, women in addiction recovery, and survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And she's also the author of the book, Embodied Social Justice, introducing a research-based and body-centered approach to working with oppression to human service professionals such as social workers, counselors, and educators. And I'll also post more about her website in the chat. So thanks, Ray, for being here. And then, not at all least, but just last in the introductions, I'm pleased to introduce Yursur Rahotep. Yursur also has a lengthy list of accomplishments, and so forgive the abridgment, just so we can hear from you rather than just talk about you and look at you. A creator of the Yoga Skills Method of Kemetic Yoga, and the leader of the global Kemetic Yoga movement with over 42 years of experience in practice, teaching, training, and certifying Kemetic yoga instructors around the world. He conducts historical, cultural, and spiritual tours of Egypt, Ethiopia, Ghana, South Africa, and other parts of the African diaspora. He's also a practitioner of Tai Chi and Qigong. He's a professor at DePaul University School for New Learning in Chicago, has created many cutting-edge courses, Ancient Wisdom versus Modern Science, the American Family and Genealogy, and is also involved in several research projects. So currently working on a project conducted at Cook County Jail in Chicago, measuring the effect of mindful meditation on relapse and recidivism rates on inmates upon their release. Yursur's done, many programs. I maybe just mention he was given an award in 2004 by the Easter Seals organization for helping children with physical, cognitive, and emotional disabilities through his Yoga Skills for Kids program, which has been replicated nationally and internationally. And you can get his fuller story at yogaskills.com. And I'll be posting those coordinates in the chat. So thank you all very much, for both being able to speak to us today about your work, about your own experience. And so if it's all right with you, could I ask you, Yursur, to start us off, just to describe your work and in the way that you choose to describe what you believe is important about your approach, both for your audiences and the needs that your work addresses.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being here, and I'm honored to be here with the other panelists. My work is centered around Kemetic yoga and using Kemetic yoga as a tool for healing and for liberation for oppressed people. And the word Kemetic comes from the word Kemet. Kemet is the original name for the country we call Egypt now. And Egypt is in Africa. I had to say that because when I was in grade school, in my geography book, they took Egypt out of Africa. It was just an empty space where Egypt should have been, because they didn't want people to know that Egypt was in Africa. And they put it up in the corner of the page, and they wrote Middle East under it. And so it's important for us, number one, to know that it's important for people of African descent, and really all people, to know that yoga as a form of healing, as a form of transformation, has an origin in ancient Africa. and not just Egypt. Egypt is more like a flowering of the culture, but and it's the place where we have the most visible remains of that civilization of ancient Africa, still there. But Egypt influenced Europe, you know, the Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians, all the way into India, into China. You know, Egypt had a far-ranging influence on the development of culture. And so what we try to do with Kemetic yoga is to reawaken people's awareness of the fact that we have, in our ancient times, we had created a system of healing and a system of transformation that was very elaborate and very effective. And that there's a value to working with our people in terms of them being aware of their own ancestral roots. Why that's important for people of African descent is because the process of slavery, enslavement, the process of colonization, one of the goals was to erase memory of the ancient past and who we are and what things that we do. So we were told that we had never done anything. The cities in ancient Africa were demolished. The records of our accomplishments have been demolished or being attributed to other people. And so Kemetic yoga is part of the resurrection of African civilization, a resurrection of the recognition of African civilization as being one of, if not the primary mover of global world civilization. And so we have a very elaborate system of yoga that comes out of ancient Egypt. And the people of ancient Egypt who created this system, they came from many other parts of Africa. We can see evidence of yoga that goes back tens of thousands of years, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 years in different African cultures. And so, and so we use Kemetic yoga, we use the techniques of controlled deep breathing, the technique of coordinating the breath with the movement, of putting the emphasis on moving energy and life force through the body, opening up all the energy channels, using yoga and meditation to connect with our ancestors, with our divine forces, which we call the Neteru, to develop our psychic abilities so we can use those abilities as a means for our liberation, as a means for self-creation. And you know, I don't want to keep going on, but that's sort of like a synopsis of what I do. And so I've used Kemetic yoga. I'm a social worker. I'm a therapist. So I've used Kemetic yoga as a means of healing, as a means of working with children, as a means of working with the elderly, substance abusers, those who have suffered from a wide variety of social and psychological maladies that are most of the time the result of living in a racist, white supremacist society that is oppressive. And so Kemetic yoga is for all people. You know, we work with everybody because we feel that the technique of it, the technique that we offer is very effective from a healing perspective. And so finally, I'm gonna say that the meditation technique that we use that came from ancient Egypt is called Resu Koyet. And so that technique, they used the hieroglyph of a bed with an open eye resting on top of the bed to represent the idea of being awake while asleep. So it's very similar to lucid dreaming, where you are awake and aware that you are asleep and you are actively participating in your dream. Okay, we can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. No, I appreciate that very much. I'm wondering, Ray, if you'd be willing to go next and tell us a little bit about your work and its impact.
Sure. I think that in many ways, my own sort of path to coming to the realization for me that experiences of oppression, marginalization, sort of the inequitable, unfair power dynamics that I experienced in my relationships with others in the world, it took me a while to realize how much that had to do with my body, not just how my body looked, and how I presented, but also how my body moved and how I experienced my body from the inside out. And I got really curious about this in a serious way when I began working in a shelter for homeless youth. And that particular year, that particular summer, when I first began that work, I was fresh out of psychotherapy training, quite naive, but with my own history of trauma and oppression, but quite an unrecognized, unacknowledged, uncultivated and unhealed history. And what happened for me was that I saw people who, by anyone's account, could be considered to be living on the margins of society for lots of different kinds of reasons. And as I was working with the residents of this shelter, I came to realize that many of them were describing bodily phenomena, experiences in their own body, senses of connection or disconnection, particular movement patterns, physical ailments, those kinds of things that I recognized in my own body. And a light bulb went off. I went, oh, this isn't, because I didn't have, to my knowledge, a known history of trauma. There wasn't sort of some secret big single acute traumatic event in my own past, in my own childhood that I went, oh, that's why. And it was at that point I came to understand that oppression was traumatic and that a lot of the things that I'd been trained to pay attention to as a social worker and as a psychotherapist in terms of nervous system patterns and responses and issues around body image and feelings of shame on a body level, that those were actually connected to being a member of an oppressed group, not just someone who had experienced a single acute trauma. And that was really eye-opening and life-changing for me. And from that point on, I went, oh, we've got all of these trauma tools, but we haven't been applying them. We haven't been using or cultivating them with probably what I would argue is the biggest population of traumatized people, which is people who experience the everyday, insidious, chronic misuse of social power in ways that are harmful to them. So for me, that sort of set me on my path, and I've been doing that work and engaged in research and teaching and writing on that subject ever since. It really feels to me as though one of the things that is beginning to be more widely recognized, and I'm so happy that this panel even exists, this idea there's a connection between oppression and our experience of being in the body, and the ways in which our bodies interact with others that I would argue actually even serve to reproduce those unjust, unfair power imbalances that we're, in a way, reproducing the systems of oppression from the bottom up as well as from the top down. So I think that's sort of kind of mostly where I'm coming from in a nutshell.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Ray. I'll ask Wendy to speak now.
Yeah. Hi, it's really a pleasure to be here and sharing on this panel with all of you. I want to start by talking a little bit about how I understand and work with trauma and addiction. And my definition of addiction is very inclusive. It's the definition that we use in the Beyond Addiction program. And it's about any behavior that provides temporary pleasure or relief. There's craving, and there are negative consequences. But in spite of those negative consequences, we continue the behavior. And so that really opens things up to people to start to understand how we all have addictions as ways to soothe our pain, to kind of distract ourselves from the dis-ease of being present with what is. And so, not only does it include drugs and alcohol, but sex, our relationship with food, shopping, potentially gambling, scrolling on social media, the way we consume the news, texting and driving. Once you start to really broaden it, I think everyone starts to relate a little bit. It also can include gossip, worry, judgment. So it's all the different ways that we reach outside of ourselves to disconnect from the pain. And I think understanding addiction in such a broad scope really evokes compassion. And part of my mission is to destigmatize the word addiction. And I think to really understand and heal addiction, we have to really explore the trauma that's at the root of it, because I also believe that at the root of all addiction is pain and trauma. And, not necessarily those big T traumas, that one big incident, but it's that chronic, just that the chronic feeling of being disconnected possibly from ourselves, from other people. There's something that I think might have been missing from my bio. I'm also a facilitator for Compassionate Inquiry, Gabor Mate's program. And we work so much with the way that we heal is through connecting with the breath, grounding, connecting into the body, connecting with our feelings, and connecting with one another. Because the idea is that there was something that happened, and as a result of that thing that happened, there was no one for us to talk to. And so we end up feeling unheard, unseen, invalidated, not connected. And so therein lies another trauma. And so the way that we can heal addiction is through connection. And the way that we can heal trauma is through connecting with ourselves, through the breath, through being aware of the body, connecting with other people, through community, connecting with nature, etc. So really the solution is being seen, being heard, being validated, being held. And a little bit of how I came to this work, my childhood, I was alone a lot. I was a tomboy, I was gay, I was always the tallest kid in the class. I'm 6 feet tall. I was also smart, so I spent a lot of time climbing trees, escaping into choose your own adventure books, building things in the garage, like a go-kart. So my first drug of choice was actually fantasy and adventure. And then, so I never really felt like I belonged. I didn't really fit in until I entered the gay club scene. And all of a sudden, that was it. I was safe. I was free. I felt welcome. I felt connected. I felt like I belonged. And, I spent close to a decade as a bartender, a club promoter. I created a women's night where 1,200 to 1,600 women would come from all across the region every week, line up around the block. And, this was in the 90s. And we were able to come together in community and celebrate and connect. So when I moved to LA 20 years ago, I started working for a nonprofit social service agency where we provided services to LGBT youth. And again, we're creating safety, acceptance, validation, building connection with them. At the same time, I got into recovery because, what often goes hand in hand in the gay community when we're connecting through clubs is like the drugs and alcohol. So I found gay AA in LA. And I'll tell you, like, that's where it was for me. The same time I discovered Kundalini yoga. So I learned to connect with community, the body, the breath, a power greater than myself. And again, feeling welcome, accepted, and supported. And so, you know, I really carry that forth in all of the work. I went back for my doctorate in clinical psychology as a way of bringing together mindfulness, recovery, Kundalini yoga, and creating community. So I do these yoga immersions. I was invited to create a cutting-edge, innovative specialization that trains therapists. And it's all about how do we embody compassion and be present, and build community and connection as a way of healing. So I think I'll stop with that for now, but thank you so much. Yeah, pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wendy. And in passing it over to Valerie, I just want to mark that this is her 6th hour of speaking on a panel today. So as a testament to her commitment and her strength for joining us and doing more of the same. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So when I heard you talk about looking at the map of Africa, and I can remember looking at that map of Africa and thinking, where the hell is Egypt, man? It's like, where is it? It's just this thing of embodiment, because, and just hearing Dr. Wendy Harris talking about embodying compassion, because I say as Black people, as Indigenous people, compassion is in us. You know, if you think what's happened to our people and, you know, how we connect with the colonizer and oppressor, that there's a lot of compassion already in us. And for me, my work, it's this that Yusur spoke about, the erasure of the ancient, of what we had. And I think my work is very much about coming back to the earth. I mean, my people were displaced. I'm of slave stock, you know, which African has the name Mason John, you know, which is my earth. And I say that I'm a stateless Indigenous person. And I think I've been saying recently, for the rest of my life is about the uplift, of my people. Yeah, how many more years have I got left? And part of that uplift is that, yes, I'm still in communication with white people, but it is around the uplift of my people. And I would say that for me, it really is about coming back to the body. Everything for me begins in the body. You know, we have a physical sensation in the body, and upon that physical sensation in the body, thought arises. And upon the thought arising, thinking arises. And upon thinking arises, action arises. But the majority of us are just not at home in the body. When people ask me, where is home? Home is here in the body. If I can be at peace here in the body, I can be at home anywhere. But it's so hard for people, for many, many people, to be at home in the body. In fact, the majority of people left their body age 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Nobody was home. All the sense doors shut. All feelings switched off, and nobody home. And how do we bring somebody back home to the body? And I'm very much, I very much in touch with the teaching of the shamans. And before I say that, I really want to say that for me, I come from a Buddhist tradition. And one of the things that I always remember is that the Buddha rediscovered the way. So if the Buddha rediscovered the way, that meant the way was already there before. And so often it's like, we've invented this, we've invented that. But if we think of the Akashic record, every thought and every memory was there, you know, as we heard from Yusur, like yoga, we tend to think of this yoga as this, it's become this white athletic thing. Do you know what I mean? In fact, if you go to India, you see it's mainly older people who are doing this practice, but it's become about athleticism and having this beautiful body. And yet we hear that yoga has a his history in the continent of Africa. And there's this beautiful teaching, and it's arguable where it came from, whether it came from the continent of Africa or Latin America, but we all had shamans. And it said that when somebody was spiritually, physically, emotionally, or mentally sick, they'd be taken to the shaman. And the shaman would ask 4 questions. And the first question would be, when did you stop singing? And we could take this on a literal level, but begin to think out of the box and take that on a metaphorical level. When did we lose our voice? And many of us lost our voice even before we came into the world. You know, my people lost their voice. I mean, thank God we can still speak. If I think of embodiment, I think of the oral. We come from this oral tradition, which has kept us alive. Yeah, a cappella has kept us alive. But this question, when did we stop singing? The second question is, when did you stop dancing? When did you lose that play? Yeah. And again, we can take this on a literal level, or we can take it on a metaphorical level. Yeah. When did we stop dancing? The third question is, when did you stop being enchanted by your own story? And many of us, before we came into this world, have had no, you know, being enchanted by our own story. I mean, many of us are born into this hell realm where there is oppression, you know, whether we're born in a black body, a brown body, a queer body, a trans body, a female body. Yeah. When did we stop being enchanted by our own story? And the fourth question is, when did you stop being able to dwell in the sweet territory of silence? And for many of us, this is the stinking thinking that we are assailed by so much papancha, so much proliferation of thought that we're here. You know, we can't drop down into the body that we hear, and we're driven by this. I talk about the mind dropping back into the heart, because in the West, mind and heart are these two things. And actually what I say is what's happened is that the mind has pushed the heart out, because mind and heart needs to be one. And often we're acting from that place of mind. And a question that I introduce to these 4 questions is, and again, I would say that this would have come from the Buddha. It could have, it's not my question, but it's a question that feels very pertinent to me, is when did you stop breathing? Yeah. When did you stop breathing? And you know, when we stop breathing, we get tense. Yeah, we get tense. We've lost any kind of embodiment. Yeah. And if we think of today, we're in 2 pandemics. We've got the pandemic of the COVID-19. We've got the pandemic of racism. We've got the epidemic of the fires, and all of them is affecting the breathing. Yeah. And so for me, often when I go into the meditation rooms, or when I go into the rooms of mindfulness, or when I go into the rooms of Black, Indigenous people of color, how do I teach people to breathe? Okay, yeah. Embodiment, I mean, for some people, walking along the street now, it's like we have this Black British word called digi. You're digital, like a digital clock which flashes on and on your digi. You're looking around, and it's like when a police car drives past me, I stop. Yeah, the white person walks on, and literally, I was with a friend, police car passed by, she carried on walking, I stopped. Yeah, so it's almost like a privilege to be speaking about this in embodiment, for me, we have to be actually talking to the dysregulation of people, because there is a lot of dysregulated people out there in the world. And how can we catch them? Yeah. How can we help with their transformation? And what's going to make them come to us? So I think I end with this, is partly my work is how do I, like what Yasir is doing with yoga, making yoga accessible to different communities. Often when people think of yoga, oh, it's this white privilege thing. Hold on a minute. It's like meditation. Oh, it's this white privilege thing. Oh, therapy, it's this white privilege thing. Actually, all of these things have been in our cultures. How can we make these things accessible to all people? How can we do that? How can we make things so much more culturally specific so it doesn't become something for the elite? That's me. I am complete. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to actually open it up to allow you to respond to what you've just heard in the way that you'd like.
I was gonna, what I started thinking about was the idea from an ancient Egyptian or Kemetic mythology, so-called mythology, that that deals with remembering, right? Because I deal with this concept of remembering, thinking of the body as being a collection of different members. And so in one of our ancient stories, Asar was dismembered. He was cut into 14 pieces and his body was scattered. And then his wife, who represents the sacred feminine, she had to bring his pieces back together. And then she had to apply the breath to allow him to become animated again. So he was remembered. And so the process of yoga is the process of remembering who you are, what is your true nature, who were you and what were you before you was dismembered, and then becoming self-actualized. So you realize you go through a process of self-realization in terms of remembering who you really are and what your true power is before society and before these oppressive systems that we exist under have tried to damage you in order for them to be able to exploit you. So you remember who you true are, what your true nature is, and what your true power is. And then you become self-actualized when you start to have the technology through your practices to put into action your true power. So to manifest, your reality through the things that you do, and to have a process, have a methodology by which you create your own reality. And so to me, that's what yoga is about. It's about self-realization and self-actualization. And that's why it's such a revolutionary activity, because when human beings become self-realized and self-actualized, nobody can stop them.
Yeah, I love that. As you're talking about being dismembered and the remembering, I'm really relating with that in terms of the disconnection and the reconnection, right? Like really just reconnecting with our true essence. And so much of what Valerie also was saying, I'm really connecting with that. It's like that healing journey back to self, whether it's to remember or to reconnect, and how we do it through these embodied practices, our yoga, the breath, connection with movement, and through one another, through community. Yeah.
And so I'm curious, I don't know, Ray, if you had something to add, but the question of what has your own embodiment practice meant for you, and how is that important for you, in learning your work. You're involved in some very difficult intersections. And so, I'd be very curious and appreciative to hear how your own practices sustain you in being in that work in the world.
Yeah, I was gonna add a further thought to the conversation, so maybe I'll just take that ball and run with it for a little bit. A number of us have talked about dysregulation, the really natural response of our bodies to being under threat. And I think one of the things that those of us who work at this intersection of embodiment and social justice, and one of the contributions that we can begin to make is how does our understanding of those physiological responses need to shift when the threat is chronic? And what does that mean, and how is that different? And how can we harness the practices of yoga and mindfulness and dance and all of the other kinds of really rich somatic practices that we have available to us, thanks in large part to many of the folks who are doing really good work in making them more accessible. But how do we harness those practices, not just to sustain ourselves, although I think that's important, to sustain and to begin to transform the wounds that we've sustained, but how do we also use those practices to change the systems that we're living in, so that we're not living in systems that place us under constant threat. So I think there's that other piece of how do we begin to shift the understanding of embodiment practices, not just as a tool for personal healing and transformation, but actually as a system for engaging with social change. And so for me, that's the value of my practice. Although absolutely it started with me trying to come to some kind of place of grounded and centered and authentic inside myself, given the social worlds that I was living in. It feels to me like it's bigger than that now. Now the way in which I feel as though my practice, and it doesn't feel like things I go off and do for me. For me, it's like just this process of your seer. I love that image of being awake while you're dreaming. For me, it's a process of reminding myself that I can wake up in my own body more often than I think I can. And there's sometimes when, quite frankly, that's not advisable. I'm not in a safe situation, and it's actually more protective to me. Just shut it down. But that shutting down becomes chronic. And so how, when I'm awake in my own body, when I'm present and engaged and alive and relationally engaged, can that have a ripple effect? And what does that do? And how can I devote some of the energy that I get from being connected to my body as a source? How can I use some of that energy to changing the systems? So that's how I use my practice.
It's very.
That's how I try to use my practice.
Can I respond to that? There was like a horrible echo then as it gone. Yeah, just as you were saying that, Ray, I was just thinking that as a young person, I was always in chronic threat. Like before I could even think about mindfulness or yoga, I had to learn to love my Black body, you know? I mean, that internalized racism, the darker you are, the uglier you are, you know, and we still see it. It's like we talk about slavery being abolished, but actually the rationalization of it is still there because we're still considered inferior, and the darker we are, inferior. I mean, I've even had this with the embodiment conference. When you look at the pictures there and pushed it, and finally, okay, there's some black men, and then, oh, they got some light skinned women, where the dark skin. There's still this this threat, and so for sometimes for me, that embodiment has to really start at that place of healing from be it racial trauma or sexual assault trauma or gender trauma, before you know, it may be that we can get somebody on the yoga mat or somebody in a meditation room, but most of the people who've been really dysregulated, they want a quick fix. In fact, they've gone for the quick fix. They've gone for the crack. They've gone for the cocaine. They've gone for whatever, for that quick fix to be out of the body because they have been completely dismembered. Yeah. So again, looking at on a metaphorical level, and it's there's the personal and the collective, because I really think during this time it's a very dismembering time at the moment for everyone, you know, no matter what side of the coin you are. You know, I think, like, what is it like for people who are working in the police force in the US right now when they go out to work, you know? So they're completely discombobulated. You know, what is it like for, you know, predominantly Black, brown, Hispanic men going out on the streets, or for the mothers or for the parents? Like, there is so much dismembering happening. And how can we remember and come back to this true essence? So I think for me, I've had the privilege to heal. Definitely, I've had the privilege to heal. And so my job is to really model what I have, so that when people come into connection with me, they feel something, that they want something. We call that the fourth sight in Buddhism. I had a Black friend of mine many years ago, was my fourth sight, thinking, I want something that she has. I don't know what it is. You know, and when Black men see you, sir, they come up and it's like, I want something he has, you know, or I want something of what Ray has, or something that Wendy has. And people get curious, and that's the best I can do. And if it changes one person's life, then I have managed to do something. So there are, for me, I always say, I'll end with this, is that the easy bit is to be up there in a studio teaching the trauma, teaching yoga, teaching compassionate inquiry. That's the easy bit. The easy bit is writing books. I can say that I write books. The hardest thing is to live what we teach. That's the embodiment practice, and that's what's going to impact somebody. You know, when I'm in a store, you know, we have to sometimes, those of us who are practitioners, would we want our students to see us talking to our partners? You know, would we want our students seeing us talking to the waiter or the waitress? You know, but how can I? That's the practice out there on the street, to really embody what I believe and what I teach.
But a couple of things sort of come to mind for me, because from a very practical level, the breath or breathing to me serves a couple of functions. In Kemetic yoga or in ancient Kemet, we use the term shu, S-H-U, shu, to represent the breath, right? And the controlled deep breathing is the intervention that we use to break this whole cycle of being disintegrated, being discombobulated, being disconnected from yourself, with your mind being disconnected from your body, your mind and your body being disconnected from your emotions. So we use controlled breathing as an intervention to number one, to activate the parasympathetic aspect of your autonomic nervous system, which is your relaxation response, right? So we want to bring ourselves into a state of relaxation. We want to stimulate the healing hormones and the neurotransmitters that bring about a state of healing and allows the body to repair itself, allows the body to reintegrate itself. And at the same time, we are introducing another addiction, but this addiction is a positive addiction, because once we start to feel good from the breathing that we're doing, and we can start to feel the positive effects, we begin to crave that feeling that we get when we go, when we become relaxed, when we become focused, when we take away the pain. And so the fundamental remembering mechanism is the breathing, is controlled deep breathing. And so, and so we practice, you know, you could do breathing sitting up in a chair, you can do it laying on the floor, you can do it with your legs crossed, you could do it standing up. You know, it's a very practical practice to do. And there's so many different variations of breathing that you can do.
Yes, sir, I want to come in here with the breath, because I definitely, all of us have to, at some point, if we're going to go through that healing process, to get back to the inhale, the exhale. But for some people, there's no way you can take them there straight away. And that's something that I've had to really become aware of as a mindfulness teacher, as a trauma teacher, that actually that can be one of the most activating places to begin with, although I know that that's the destination. So for me, sometimes it might just be lifting up the head, turning the head side to side, and right, just learning these simple things first. And so actually they're not even realizing that they're connecting to the breath, but because it is, as we know, that some people, it's I can remember working with a client and there was just no way that they could go to the breath. There was just absolutely no way. And I had to throw everything out the window and think, okay, I know that's the destination, but I have to start where the person's at.
Yes. And so, yeah. And so your experience and your acumen as a teacher allows you to know when you might just need to use movement in order to activate the breath. Yeah. So when a person begins to move, they automatically, subconsciously begin to breathe.
Yeah.
So, and so the movement intersects with breathing. Movement helps to increase breathing. It helps to deepen the breath, and so on and so forth. You know, the final thing I wanted to say was that in terms of social change, creating the movement, that's part of the self-actualization. When you start to create your own reality, when you start to convince individual people that they need to form a collective, and then start to change the conditions that they exist in.
I just want to go back to the breath for one second. Like, when in doubt, always go back to the breath, right? Like, for me, that's like home base, the breath. And I truly believe that through the breath, that is our pathway to healing. You know, something we say in the yogic science is, if you can control the breath, you can control your mind. And if you can control your mind, you can control the emotions, right? So that all sounds really good. And again, back to Valerie's point, like that can be very ambitious for some of the clients, the people that we're working with. And I'm reminded that, you know, and safety has come up, right? Like when you don't feel safe walking down the street, you know, or as a result of multiple trauma, social injustice, et cetera. We're living at a time of, right, multiple pandemics. So where is the safety, right? Where do you find the safety? And we have to have safety in order to feel vulnerable and open up and really connect in that way, which leads us to the healing. So I think, you know, a big part of the work I do is to create that safety that will create a space for the vulnerability so we can do the healing.
And the question for us, I think for all four of us here is that those people out on the streets doing that explicit activism, that question is, well, where is the place of yoga, meditation, trauma work? Because we know, I mean, I was saying to a white friend of mine, because he couldn't understand why people were so angry about certain things. And I said, you know what? It's like we have sat in rooms for years saying this needs to happen with breath. We've sat in rooms for years saying this needs to happen with compassion, and nothing has ever happened. And change has only happened when people have got angry. Okay, you know, the destruction of the mythos, the toppling of the statues. People have for years said, remove some of these statues and buildings. Nothing has happened. Yeah. So in a way, where is the place for our practice for those people out on the streets campaigning? Because I used to be one of those people on the streets campaigning. And I think for me, answering my own question, I think there needs to be that we all have different roles to play. And for me, I'm there to catch those people who are out on the streets protesting, because we need the healers to help and support those people. We need the yoga studios, we need the meditation rooms, the trauma rooms.
I'm reminded by what you're saying, Valerie, that this idea that embodiment practices and the work of becoming more fully embodied, the purpose is not to tolerate our conditions. It's not to help us feel better enough that we can tolerate unjust conditions. It's to allow us to get to the place where we've got the strength and resourcing and connectivity to change those material conditions. So I think there's absolutely a connection there. And I would argue that it's perhaps it's the place where some embodiment practices stop. And I think for me, taking that extra step and saying, this isn't just for healing, it's for healing and change.
Yes. Because, you know, something I've been thinking about lately is that you have to have the intention. You can practice yoga, you can practice meditation, and you can still remain, for lack of a better word, an asshole, right? You have to have the intention that I want to transform myself into a particular way. And a perfect example is that when you look at Nazi Germany, Hitler was a vegetarian. He was he practiced, the Nazis, they practiced meditation. They practiced, they believed in different types of metaphysics. They didn't eat meat and that kind of stuff, right? And they destroyed millions and millions of people. So you have to have the intention along with the practice. It can't just be, I'm going to do yoga, I'm going to do meditation, and I'm not going to be an oppressor.
And I'm afraid we're at the hour already. I mean, it feels like this is a conversation that could happen for hours or days. And I really want to thank all of you for giving again of your time and yourselves and your expertise. All of our speakers are going to be participating in the conference. I've included links just to point you to each of their respective websites so you can follow up and learn more about their work. A link to the Facebook group for the conference. There are conversations that are magnifying across these kinds of intersections each day, and we hope through the conference time period itself, October 14th to 25th. And also today marks the end of a special rate for all of the recordings. The entire conference is free to participate, but we are looking for some of, I think, the over 230,000 people registered so far to invest in a really a global aggregation of wisdom, of practice and of hopefully community that continues to connect and continues to breathe together and continues to make change that's real in the world. So I want to thank you very much. And we'll close the session here. And thanks to everyone who's attending both through this Zoom webinar and through the Facebook Live. So thank you all.
Thank you, Hotep.
Thank you. It was wonderful to speak with you all.
Yeah, nice meeting
Thank you.